Hello, Sewing Weekenders. I am Marcy of Oonaballoona and also the Handmade Heralds. My partner in crime, Rob, is off watching a little virtual track meet. So I'm here virtually with you today to talk about some wax print and how to get y'all in it quickly and easily with a half circle skirt, my favorite kind of circle skirt. This is the print we're going to be playing with today. A little bird cage heart keyhole action. What I'm wearing right now is also wax print. You see me in wax print all the time because wax print has all of the colors and all of the prints. Two things I love. This fabric originated in Holland. It was created by the Dutch as a way to knock off Indonesian batik. But there was something in the process that didn't give that batik finish that Indonesia was used to. And so trade routes brought it to Africa where it was fully embraced. Luckily, because can you imagine not having these in your life? If you're buying quality wax print, you're buying 100% cotton wax print, and it's coming to you in a 6-yard cut. So you have a lot of fabric to play with. It's about 45 inches wide, depending on the width of the selvage. So you don't have a lot of width to play with, but you do have a lot of length. Once you unfurl the yardage, you might get a whole new view on the print placement. You might find that there's a dove in the middle of the wax print that you didn't even know was there before you unfurled the fabric. So a half circle skirt is great for wax print because you get a nice large canvas with only one center back seam. If later on you decide, you know what, I really want to play with that wax print in a different way, you've got a nice big canvas that's only broken up by one seam that you can repurpose later. And that one seam is going to mean that you don't have to do a lot of print placement matching, because I'll tell you what, in wax print you will get some awkward print placement occasionally. You just have to embrace it. I often highlight my reproductive organs in my wax print creations, and I'm good with that. Let's talk about the circle skirt that we're going to make. We are making the half circle skirt. There's a quarter circle skirt. There's a full circle skirt. The half circle skirt to me is sort of like the Goldilocks of the three bears of circle skirts. It's easy to draft and it's got volume without being too much volume or too little volume. It's just right. And that's the one that we're gonna do today. All you're gonna need are your measurements. And when I say measurements, I mean your waist measurement. Let me just get my measuring tape here. I just organized this, and it doesn't matter, because I still can't find anything. You bend from side to side, and where that bend happens, that's your waist measurement. If you don't have a bend from side to side, if you don't feel an indentation when you bend side to side, then you're just going to eyeball where you like your waistline to sit, right? Your most comfortable pair of jeans or most comfortable skirt, where does that sit on you? That's where you're going to measure your waist. And I measure my digits every single time I sew a project because they fluctuate. They fluctuate from week to week depending on the time of the month, what I'm eating, what kind of exercise I'm getting or not getting. At the moment, I am a 29 and a half. And it's a good thing I measured that because that's a ½ inch different than I was last week. And it could change next week. So that's the number I'm going to use for my calculation. Now, the length of the skirt is going to be dependent on the width of your fabric. This fabric is not very wide. It's 45 inches wide. So as a shouty, I can usually get a maxi length to T-length skirt out of this. You may find that you're making a half circle mini skirt or a half circle knee length skirt. Again, you can always rip that center back seam back out and rejig this if you end up not liking it, right? It's sewing. It's all play. It's all practice. There are no failures. Let's get our apps out. You can find lots of circle skirt calculators online, but I love my humans at By Hand London. You can choose to work in inches or centimeters. You can choose if you want a quarter, a half, or a full, mini, maxi. They got a lot of options for you. Options. So I'm working in inches and I'm choosing the half circle skirt, and I'm going to choose mini just because the app will tell you that your fabric isn't wide enough if you go higher than that, I find. Then I'm just going to input my waist measurement and have them do the maths for me. Listen, I know that it's a cliche and a stereotype that we're not supposed to perpetuate, but I actually am quite bad at math. Quite bad at it. Do the maths, please. My waist radius is 8 3/4. This is truly one of two measurements that we need: waist radius, waist diameter. So my two measurements are 8 3/4 and 29.5. 29.5 is going to be our waistband length. We're going to add SA around that, and 8 3/4 is the diameter, and I'm going to show you how to mark that directly on the fabric. We don't even need to draft a pattern for this. Okay, before I get on the floor and cut this thing, actually, I'm just going to demo what it's like for you to fold this skirt up and cut it out, because this is a lot of fabric and this is a small New York apartment, so we got to work with what we got. So we're going to imagine that this is a nice big length of wax print fabric. You are going to fold your fabric selvage edges meeting. So you've got your selvage edges matched up and you've got your fold of the fabric, right? So your fold of the fabric is the front of your skirt and the selvage edges are the center back seam. So you're going to take your waist radius and you're going to start to mark down from the fold point of your fabric that radius. From that point down, down and down, and that's going to be your waist radius right there. And then you're going to drop from your waist radius equally all the way around for the hem. This one's going to end up being more of like a half circle skirt for a little Mitzi back here. Mitzi Gaynor? I don't know. I'm not sure what her name is yet. I'm still coming up with it. But I'm going to pretend my waist radius is 3.5 inches for the purposes of this demo. So I'm going right from the point of that fold and I'm dropping it down 3.5 inches, making a mark. And I'm just going to keep going all the way around. You could use a protractor, I believe, for something like this. But again, don't quote me on it because that's a very mathy thing to say. So once you connect these dots, you've got your waist radius. And now from here, you're going to drop down. Now, if we look at this fabric right here, however long I have from my waist radius to the selvage is how long my skirt can be. So this skirt measures from waist radius to the selvage 9 3/4 inches of length. For the purposes of this little quick demo, we're going to drop it down 9 inches from the waist radius all the way around that first measurement that we did. Connect those lines, make it a nice gentle curve. And then we're going to cut. That's the half circle skirt. When you pin this seam up and sew it up and add a waistband, that will be your one main skirt piece. Isn't she cute? She's so cute. I just want to kind of wear her like this. I might use this little demo thing for like a little fluttery arm embellishment, sort of flutter sleeve. That's the great thing about half circle skirts, about circle skirts, about all of these shapes. These are just shapes that you can play with and you can add into almost anything you're making in any iteration, as long as you've got the circumference of whatever you're working with. You can make this shape for whatever you want to envelop in fabric and just go wild. You could even use a longer diameter, and then suddenly you've got a little flouncy addition to a strapless dress. You've got a little peplum. Well, you can't see because, again, it's New York and it's really small in here, but you could insert it in the waist. You can do lots of things. I'm going to go to the floor now, and I'm going to cut out the real deal, the big shebang. Follow me, won't you, to the floor? Let's go, huh? Now that we've got our circle skirt cut out, our half circle skirt, it is time to draft the waistband. And when I say draft the waistband, it ain't that hard, y'all. I've marked my waistband here on the cross grain of the fabric. The length is my waist radius plus 1 inch for ease, and the width is my desired finished width. I want my waistband to be 1 inch wide, so that's 1 inch by 30.5 inches, and then I've marked seam allowance all around that box. Now we're going to cut 2 of these because we're going to face this waistband. I like a faced waistband. I feel like it sits better and it behaves better in the long run. At this point, you should decide which of these waistbands you want on the front of you. I think I'm going to take this one because it has more of the gorgeous blue teal in it, and I'm going to interface this waistband. You don't have to interface, but I recommend it. When I first started sewing, I was like interfacing, 1, what's that? 2, what's it gonna do for me? And 3, where is it supposed to go? I always interface the public side of whatever I'm doing. If it's a collar, whatever part of the collar is facing the world, that's the one that's interfaced. The waistband, whichever side is facing the world, that's the one that's interfaced. I'm using a tricot interfacing. This interfacing is wonderful. I get it here in town at Steinlauf and Stoller. It gives the fabric stability without changing the hand of the fabric. The hand, as it were. You don't have to interface the entire waistband. You can just interface the finished portion of the waistband. I'm just going to interface the whole thing because we gotta get sewing. We're burning daylight here, aren't we? This is the sewing weekender, right? You got a lot of other things to do. Let's just cut out this interfacing. Okay, so you can see we've got our interfacing ready to apply to the waistband. The glue side of the interfacing is touching the fabric. I'm gonna flip it over to the other side. And I'm not even going to use a press cloth for this because this is 100% cotton, and the heat of the iron and the steam of the iron isn't going to affect this fabric too badly. It's a little risky, but I do it on wax print a lot. So interface as you normally would. For me, that means hitting it with some steam, letting that iron sit for 10 seconds. Don't wiggle it. Don't shimmy it round. Just let it sit, pick it up, move it to the next section. Now once you're done interfacing, let it sit, let it cool, don't move it, don't touch it. It needs a minute. It's like a hot cookie right now. If you take a hot cookie right out of the oven, it's delicious, but it will fall apart in your hands. You don't want that to happen to your interfacing. You want that to cool. You want that hot cookie to firm up, all right? This just gives it a little stability, a little niceness, a little extra for us. We like extra. We like that kind of extra. I like all kinds of extra. Okay, so we've got our skirt all cut out, our real skirt, and again, the selvage edges are your center back seam, and the fold of that fabric is the front of your skirt. So I'm just going to make a little bitty snip right at that fold in the front, that we cut the skirt on. And on my interfaced waistband, I'm going to fold that so the selvage edges meet, and take another little snip on the fold there. We've made ourselves some notches, some little signposts, so we can make sure that we are matching up our waistband to our skirt properly. This is going to be familiar to those of you who are sewing fiends already. We're going to pin the waistband to the skirt right sides together. So take our little notches that we got there, match those up, and throw a pin in there. I like to make a little X marks the spot wherever there's a notch. And then you're just going to match the edges on either end. And then go ahead and pin along this entire waistband curve. I do hold my fabric up a bit when I pin my fabric together, especially on a curve like this, because I feel like the palm of my hand, the scoop, can sort of scoop the curve where it needs to be. So I keep the curve of the fabric underneath where the palm of my hand is scooping it towards me to the straight edge. And I find that works great. I know a lot of people say pin on the flat, don't you dare pick up that fabric when you pin it. Fabric wants to do what it wants to do, but fabric will also do what you coax it to do. And if you're pinning a curve on the flat, what are you coaxing it to do? Lie flat? Just don't want to lie flat. And this way, it's all nice and pinned with no bubbles and a lot less headache. Now I'm going to sew all along this seam at a 5/8 seam allowance. I'll meet you back here. New York living, you guys. Et voila. Yeah, I said voila. You've got your waistband attached to your skirt, to your main skirt piece. We're gonna flip that over, and you're gonna gently, with not too much vehemence, press the seam allowance up towards the waistband. So we've got our waistband seam allowance all sewn up and pressed up into our waistband. We're going to grade the skirt portion of the seam, not the waistband portion, because that's the public side. And the grade is going to just sort of drop off a little bit so that you don't get a ridge on the outside of your skirt. Basically, I'm cutting that skirt seam allowance in half, leaving the waistband portion of the seam allowance. I'm also going to take a little clip off the edges of the seam so that the zipper has less of a hump to get over, because some humps you don't want. She's looking more and more like a skirt. I'm gonna fold her together so that the selvages meet along our center back seam. And the cool thing, another cool thing, so many cool things about a half circle skirt married to wax print is that your one seam is already finished. You don't have to worry about these edges fraying because that's your selvage. That's not going anywhere. And wax print almost always has very, very cool selvages. I'm actually a fan of letting the selvage show on a wax print. I like these emblems. I like actually seeing where it was made and who the house was and where it came from. On the rare occasion that I don't like seeing maybe this emblem, that's what fabric markers are for. Also Sharpies. So we're going to pin up all along this edge and insert our zipper. which is where? I don't know. I've got 4 square feet of space and I'm always losing something. Here it is. This is a regular old zipper. Nothing fancy about it, nothing special about it. So we're going to mark on our fabric where our zipper is going to end, and that's going to make sense in a minute. So let me just get my chalk. Where's my chalk? I swear. So I'm just going to position the zipper at the very top of the waistband and eyeball where that zip is going to stop. And I'm going to mark about 1/4 inch above that. I'm going to make that mark on the inside, nice and long, and fold that fabric in and mark it on the outside as well. We're going to sew up this entire seam, but from the waist to this mark, we're only going to baste. From this mark to the hem, we're going to do our regular permanent stitching. We're going to watch a zipper be born. It's going to be a centered zipper that's just going to get born. I'm matching the waistband seam right here, throwing a pin in there, and just pin all along this edge, matching up your selvage edges. Now we're going to sew up the seam at a 5/8 seam allowance. Again, we're going to baste from the waist right to the mark, and then at the mark, shorten that stitch up, lock stitch it, and stitch from that mark all the way to the hem. Right sides are together. Let's stitch. We've got that center back seam all sewn up. Where is it? There's so much skirt here. It's hard to see where it is. There it is. We're going to slide that onto this jumbo ironing board and press that seam open. Now we're going to take our zipper, our regular old zipper, not an invisible zip, our regular old zip, and we're going to lay it face down on this seam, okay? The coils of the zip are going to lie right along the seam, right along it. And the very top of the zip tape is going to start at the very top of this skirt, because the seam allowance on the top of this zipper is perfect for the seam allowance of our waistband. So I'm laying the zipper head right on top of the skirt there, and I'm going to throw a pin in. And I'm orienting the head of the pin down because this is the direction we're going to sew in, and we want to remove our pins in this direction. I'm going to hold the coils up a little bit, lay them down to be sure they're laying flat on that seam line, and throw another pin in. Now when we take this over to the machine, it's a little finicky, but it's a super easy way to do a zipper. You're just going to stitch along this edge, across the bottom, and back up the top. And that's your zipper. Once you remove those basting stitches, the zipper is born. I've got my needle moved over as far as it will go to the left, and I'm just going to start to sew that box we just talked about. Okay, we've now sewn along each edge of the zipper, back stitched at both ends, we can turn it right side out now. This is always fun, but you actually need a seam ripper to do that. Let's see. Where would I be if I was a seam ripper? Huh? What would I be doing? Where would I be living? What would I be thinking? What would be in my head if I were a seam ripper? I'd be thinking, I sure do wish I was in Marcy's hands. So right from that mark, we're going to carefully remove those basting stitches, and that's it. A zip is born. Super simple centered zipper. I believe I first learned this from a Claire Schaefer sewing book, one of the first sewing books that I ever owned. Our next to last thing to do, you guys, our next to last thing to do is to attach the facing to the waistband. So let's get our other waistband piece right here. Let's get our pins out. Accounting for seam allowance. So for me, that is 5/8 of an inch away. That's the overlap from a waistband. I'm just going to pin the waistband facing to the waistband, right sides together, although on wax print, there is no right or wrong side, really. That's another fantastic thing about wax print. I could wax poetic about wax print for forever. And if we did our math right, which with me is always a crapshoot, we'll have the right amount of seam allowance at the end, and indeed we do. Go me. Now what's left to do is to sew the waistband facing to the waistband at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to sew right over the zipper coils and that seam edge right there. If you had a metal zipper or something, you want to be extra specially careful that you're not sewing into metal, but I'm not in danger of that. I've got plenty of room here. So we're going to go ahead and just stitch right along 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, we've got that facing all sewn up. We're now going to press this seam allowance down into the waistband so you can see all of the seam allowance from the skirt portion and the waistband portion are going to live inside the waistband. So let's give that a quick press. And again, I'm not being maniacal with my pressing. I'm coaxing it to live where I want it to live. At the end of the waistband, you're going to fold the seam allowance in 5/8 of an inch, and again it's wax print, so I can just give it a finger press here and it's gonna want to stay. And then you're going to fold that waistband down, covering the raw edges of the seam allowance. So you can see once you sew that together, that's going to look nice and neat. Now it's dealer's choice at the bottom of this waistband what you want to do. I have done this, finished this off many ways. I've overlocked this edge and actually let it sit down into the skirt so there's not such a hard ridge around your waist that can get a little uncomfortable. You can also fold this seam allowance under and machine stitch that down from the outside of the waistband or hand stitch that down. I like to leave myself options. So what I'm going to do is overlock this long edge and throw a few little hand stitches in there just to tack that down. So that when the waistband is finished, it'll be nice and flat, but it will also be ready for me to dissect it later when I get a little antsy. Because listen, I take a lot of my me-mades apart for later dissection and Frankensteining and recreation into whatever wax print monster I want to be wearing. The only thing left to do with this is to hem it. Now, if you're working with wax print and you decide that you want to leave that waxy feel in it and not wash that wax out, you can just go ahead and hem it. You don't need to let it hang out overnight because that bias really isn't going to drop. The wax is going to keep it stiff. If you've decided that you want to treat your 100% wax print cotton as you would any other cotton that you might use and pre-wash it, if you've washed it in cold and dried it on low, which is what I do with my wax print that I do want to label as not dry clean only, then you will want to let your skirt hang out for 12 to 24 hours so the bias will drop. You'll level the hem. On a wax print, I like to do a baby hem, which I will demo for you. Sewing weekenders, I hope you had a good time with me. Come back and see us sometime over at the Handmade Harold's on Instagram. I don't know, wherever you find me, gallivanting, probably in wax print. Peace out, y'all. Emphasis on peace.